Good afternoon. Welcome mo sa Sonlie Baking Center. For those who will just be watching for the first time, the company is situated here at Pasay City along Taft Avenue, and it is near Pasay Rotonda. Now, for today, we are going to make two items which are very popular here in the Philippines. One is pan de coco, and now which is getting popular is the use of ube. Even in pandesal they are using it, but now we are going to make it into a loaf one. Tsaka yung Magimix Green, Rio Custard. Ay, iwan ito. For pan de ube, we are going to use the following product. One is our soft instant blue. The other one is our Magimix Green. Then we have Frio in placement of the milk powder, and then the flavoring that we will use for our ube. So what we will do is just show you how the dough is mixed, and we will just get it from our previous demonstration, because if we will be doing this one, it will take us a long time. And what we did is we cut it beforehand and then cut it also to sizes. So for the time being, for those who are newly have watched the video, we will present to you how the dough is mixed. Okay, so you have here your mixing bowl, and then we are using the planetary vertical mixer. What we are doing is we are just putting all the dry ingredients, including the yeast. Anyway, since it is called instant yeast, even if you blend it with the flour and you pour water, immediately it will be dissolved. So you have the eggs, and then later on, we will add yung atin hong margarine, which is our butter dream. Be sure that before adding yung inyong margarine, see to it that the yeast is properly dissolved before adding it. And always use the slow speed, because if immediately you use a second speed, it will splash out. Now, this is how we test if your dough is already properly mixed. You try to stretch it. So if it will not be broken and form like a tiny film, then your dough is already okay. Normally, a friend of mine told me that in most of my seminar, I always give 1 hour fermentation period. So he requested me, is it okay if you could cut it a little bit so that anyway our bread could be sold also during the day. So what I did is median between a no-time dough and a straight dough. After mixing, I give it about 50 to 20 minutes rest period so that the yeast will start to activate, and then I cut it. After cutting, I give it another 15 minutes rest period, and then we go to the makeup. Now the reason is this: the amount is very small. It is only 500 grams. But if it is in big quantity, you don't have to wait for the 15 minutes, because before you could finish the last piece of dough, the first one would have been rested for about 15 minutes, so you could start immediately forming your shape. So now, here is our dough. Cut it into 260 grams, and then we're going to sieve this out. Now the reason why you have to give it a rest period is simply because that the dough will become bulky if immediately you try to form it into different shapes. Now for mass production, you don't have to finish this one immediately. You go to the next one, and then use some amount of dusting flour. Now, if you will notice these bubbles, that is the sign that your yeast is active. No bubbles, then your yeast is dead. Okay, wala. Reminder ho, we are short in manpower. So, if you have questions, we will just entertain it at the end ho ng ating home demo. Okay? So, sa production ho, this is what you will do. Seat first all your dough pieces, and then afterwards, you reseat. In that way, you have enough time ho for the dough to rest. Okay. If you have excess flour, no problem. You just use yung inyong brush to remove that. And then I have already pre-scaled ho ang ating filling. By the way, this is just my own rule as a guide only for myself. If you want to follow it, you may do so. Whatever is the weight of the dough, for example, this one is 260 grams. I multiply it by 40%, and that is the amount of the filling that I will add. So this one is equivalent to 100 grams. So we will now spread this one. So the Mongo yam that we are using is already a prepared one. So we just bought it ho sa supermarket, and it is in a glass container. Now what we did only is we added some amount ho ng aming frio, because this one contains oil. So to absorb ho lamang ho ng konti yung atin oil, that is why we added ho yung atin frio. Also, it gives also additional flavor ho sa atin tinapay, frio. This one is a prepared custard mix. Later on, if you want to have or make your own ube yam, well, I will explain it also. If you want it from scratch and not the one being bought ready-made. Okay? Afterwards, you roll. Okay. Then we go to the next one. If you have the reversible sheeter, that would be better. All you have to do is just put your dough and put it there, and then it will be stretched out on its own. And you will have the same thickness, so you will not have any problem. Now this is the reason why we want to give it a rest period. You will notice that the dough keeps on going back. It is becoming bucky, so the more you press it, the more bucky it will become. Okay. We have the second one. By the way, the more rolls you have, the better is the appearance of your bread. See to it that your filling is of spreading consistency, because if it is too firm, it would be very hard for you to spread it out. Now, if it is too thick, the same thing also will happen. I have 50% Ilocano blood, so I'm getting most of it. Okay. Then the same procedure will be done. We just roll. Then we seal. And last but not the least, now you might ask me why I use Magimix Green. Now basically, any filling that you use, like for example now ube, and we put it as filling, the Americans considered the filling as dead weight. When we say dead weight, it does not help in the rising of the dough, unlike the yeast and the sugar is food for it. Flour also it expands, but this one serves nothing because it is just your filling. That is why it is called dead weight. So therefore, if you want your bread to have volume, then you have to use Magimix Green, because that is the purpose of it. That gives you the volume for your product. It gives you the right oven kick. Also, if you use yung product ng Lusaf, like our SAP Blue, and if you want to use calcium propionate in your dough, well, that would be okay, because it is resistant to Calpro, so therefore you will also have your fermentation time as normal. We try to compare it with other yeast. If it is already Calpro in it, then the proof time becomes longer. So this would be your advantage if you're going to use our SAP Blue sa inyong bread making. Okay. This is the loaf pan that we are going to use. So you will notice that the bottom part is smaller than the upper part, so therefore it is easier for you to unload your baked product. So what we will do is this. You try to press it with the use of the rolling pin, and then with the use of the cutter, we cut it. You just leave the end, and afterwards you let it stand. and then afterwards, start crisscrossing it. Okay, so this is how it would look. Now be sure that this one is well greased. I will place it there. Okay. Pwede mo konting harina. Ito. I'm just asking for some. Okay, we follow the same procedure. You press. And then afterwards, you cut at the center. And leave the end. And then let it stand up like this. And then you twist. Okay. By the way, when you're going to use the filling, be sure that it is at room temperature. Because if you put it in the refrigerator and then use it as filling, then your proof time will become longer because the dough is cold. And also the rising of the dough will not be the same because of your filling, which is very cold. Okay. Let me just clean my hand. The dough that we were able to finish is now placed in the proof box and it will be fermented. Now, how to test? See, this is the sample of the baking pan that we're going to use. And then prior to baking, you will notice that your dough has already risen. Now, my suggestion is this, so that you will always have the same volume, whether it is cut or just plain. Before you bake, you get a piece of paper, you cut it into in shape like this, and then place it on top of the dough until it touches the dough prior to baking. So if this is not enough, then continue cutting it, and then afterwards place it again. So this would be your guide. Now the following day, instead of newspaper or a piece of paper like this, transfer it into a board like this. And then for 3 consecutive days, you put this one on top. If the dough touches this, you bake. If the volume will be the same for 3 consecutive days, this one is not allowed in the baking industry. So therefore, if you have any plastic, something like this, you now transfer it there into the plastic, you put a hole, and then this one will be the guide of your baker prior to baking. So whether it is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, January, February, or March, the volume of your bread will be the same. Unlike if you will just be using your eyes by ocular inspection, sometimes the volume is big, sometimes the volume is small. The term that they use here by the Americans is what they call template. Okay? For those that would have bigger volume, what they do is this one. They just put a stick here, so the moment the dough touches this one, then it would have a big rise also. It depends on the product, whether you have plenty of sugar or less sugar, and the oven cake is determined. You will be the one to determine it. So others, they just put a stick on top. If it touches, then they bake, and then the volume is bigger. But if that one is not possible, then you have to use another system. you have to use this type of template. Okay? Now, for those of you who doesn't want to use the one being sold into the supermarket, now this is what we do if you want to make our own filling for your ube. Now, since ube is a root crop, so you have plenty of soil in it. So try to choose ube which is violet, really violet in color. And then afterwards, you soak it in water. The reason is not for the fruit to absorb moisture, but it is just to moisten up the dirt so that afterwards, if you brush it, you can easily remove the soil. Now, two things that you could do. You cut it into pieces, not very small, just enough. You either steam or you either put it in the oven and then you bake it there. For the oven, to find out whether it is done or not, if you have this, what they call bamboo stick, you try to push it through. Then if it passes through and through, then your ube is done. So now you could peel it off and then you grate it. And then normally, what I normally do is the weight, whatever fruits or seeds that you want to use, I always use 60% of sugar based on the quantity. For example, the ube measures 1 kilo. Then 60% of 1 kilo is 600 grams. And that is what I use. Now, I notice also the following mistakes outside. Immediately, they pour all the sugar into the mix. That is why the one cooking yung atin hong ube, boy, I pity them because it took them the whole day just to finish it. Now, the technique that I found is this. For example, 1 kilo, you have the 600 grams. I divide the sugar into 3 equal parts. So you have 200, 200, 200. So what I do is after grating, you put it in your cooking pan. I place first the first 200. Naturally, with the presence of heat, the sugar will melt. So therefore, what will happen is that the mixture will become mellow. As the water evaporates, it becomes thicker. Then I add the other 200 grams. Again, the sugar will melt, it will mellow down, and then sooner or later you will notice that it will become again firm because of the rapid evaporation of the sugar. And then finally, I get the other 200, the final one, and then afterwards do the same procedure. Normally, with this type of procedure, the filling becomes a little bit dry. So my suggestion is this. Replace 10 to 15% of the sugar with corn syrup. So on the last portion, instead of the 200, you remove the a part of the 200 will be composed of your corn syrup because corn syrup is liquid, so therefore your filling will become soft. Another thing that we will do is this. After you through, you add 10% oil into the mix. Now oil, you notice oil, whether it is at room or whether it is placed somewhere else, it is always liquid at room temperature. So this is the reason why it is soft. And then finally, as you cool your product, you add now our ube flavoring plus color just to have it. Now, why did I choose steaming or baking? Because I noticed that the normal way of preparing halaya here in our country is that they boil the ube. Now what happens after boiling? Since probably the skin is not that clean, so what would happen is that they throw out the water. And what do you see in the water? It is the color violet, which you have removed from the fruit. So what will you do now to make it violet? You will now add more violet color. And for me, adding those food color is somewhat not good. I don't like adding too much food color into a product because it is not good for the kids, and they're the ones affected, not us. It is their eyesight. So this is just my main reason why I am doing it. If you want your ube to be really very fine, and if you have a door roller, then you close the door roller and then you pass it through, and then as it passes through, you have a scraper so that you will scrape it at this passes through. So therefore, this one will become final. But if you don't have it, all you do is just grate it, and then you try to cook it the way I have presented it to you. For big companies, instead of a person doing all the cooking, what they have now is made of motor. So you have that we call the kawa. This one is already established. It is already welded. And then on top, they have a motor. Then they have a reducer. And then you have here what they call a bar. And underneath it is connected is a plastic scraper. And this one runs on a continuous speed. It's low speed only so that it will not spill out. And this is what they use for big quantities. So if it is only a small one, then you could bake it, cook it on your own. But if it is already a big one, instead of hiring someone to cook it for you, then you just try to buy that special machine. It will save you a long time. Okay?
Sir, we have a question regarding Magimix Improver. Good afternoon po, Chef. May concern po ako about Magimix Improver. It is not yet expired, but I saw some tiny insect lies in it. Is it still okay? Madami pa po kasi. And what is the proper way of storing bread improver?
Well, if it is already infested by the insect, it's against ho sa policy ho ng health rule na anything na with infestation, you have to throw it out. I cannot tell you na you have to sift it out because even the insect will also pass through. So this one will be a little bit dangerous. So my suggestion is this, para maiwasan nyo ho yung insect infestation. After using, you try to wrap it, put a plastic one, and then place it inside the refrigerator. That is the safest way that you could do it. But if it is already insect infested, I will be the one to tell you that please use it. Because if somebody happens to your client, you will blame me for telling you that. But that is against the rule ho ng health department. Okay na? All right. The next one that we will be doing ho is our pan de coco. You know, I admire our baker because they have not gone any formal training in baking, but yet they could invent ho mga produkto. Now, since in our country you find coconut trees, so the way I look at it in the bakery is this. The baker would get this grated coconut fresh, and then immediately they combine it with brown sugar, and then they just pick a small amount, put it inside the dough, and then afterwards they bake it. To identify the product that it is pan de coco, they use a scissor and then cut it on top so that they will see the filling. Parang just like making siopaw, you try to put their mark, like for example red or yellow, to find out kung ano ho yung fillings inside. So in this case, they cut it this way. But I noticed that using fresh coconut as filling, the bread does not stay longer in the shelf. Sooner or later, it will become rancid. So what I did for my first trial is this. Since it is the baking center, we are allowed to do some testing to improve yung ating industry. What I did is the whole grated coconut, I add the sugar and then tried to cook it. But I did not get any good result. So in the following video, this is now what I did. Now coconut contains fat. So if you want to remove as much fat as possible, you try to get hot water, you put it in your grated coconut, and then you try to mix it first, and then afterwards you press. So you will be able to get the most oil or fat in your coconut. So if we will run ang ating we made it yesterday so that it will be a little bit faster and not consume so much time. So ito ho yung atin ginawa ko kahapon lang. So this is our langka. This is also the innovation that I have done. So we cut it into smaller pieces because it is fibrous. So hindi nyo siya po pwedeng malalaki because it's impossible for you to bite it. So you cut it into smaller pieces. And then this is what I am telling you. You don't add all the sugar at one time. You cook it first with the first one. You will notice that it will become, it will melt. And then you notice that. And then after, wala. And then afterwards, pag medyo na ho yung mixture is a little bit getting thicker, then I add the other 1/3 ho ng ating hong asukal. And then afterwards, you will notice that it's again will become fluid because the sugar starts to melt. And then finally, we get ho yung last third, and then we put it there. And then after cooling, we combine ho the coconut and the langka. Okay, this is how we made ho. That is hot water that is being poured. And I'm not the one doing it because I'm not that strong anymore. So si Chef Polly ho ang amin hong tinawag. And he is the one doing it. So pressing it. So that is your milk, coconut milk. Okay. As of now, here you have to pour all the sugar, including yung atin hong molasses. I don't want to use brown sugar because the color is variable. So I would suggest that you use white sugar, and then it's up for you to adjust the molasses. If you want to add 3%, 4%, 5%, so if you want it to be darker, just increase your molasses. This way, every day, the color of your filling will be the same. Because I go to the supermarket, I want to buy brown sugar, sometimes it is light, sometimes it is dark. So therefore, it is inconsistent. Now, what we are doing is yung coconut meat, yung pinagpisaan. So we add it there. What I normally do is, again, 60%. You get the measurement ho nung pinaka-milk, yung coconut milk, plus yung coconut na pinagtanggalan. The total amount, I think, is about 400 grams. You multiply it by 60%, so that gives you 160 grams. So whatever is it, the total, I always use the 60% as my basis. If you want to make it higher, make it 70 or make it 80, it's up to you. It is your own decision. Mine is just a base because my reason for choosing only 60% is this. So many people now are going to the hospital because of what illness? Diabetes. And it is because of eating too much sugar or incorporating too much sugar into your body. That is why I try just to limit it to 60%. So at least it is sweet, but not too sweet. Okay, huh? So that is the innovation that I have done. So I added langka. I cook it first using yung atin pinaka coconut milk, and then we combine the two. And lastly, for the flavor, para magsama yung dalawa, we use yung amin kumbani. This one is an essence made in Germany, and the owner there, Martin Brown, only uses natural product. So this is what we use. I cannot tell you use only 1 gram, 2 grams, or 3 grams because we have different taste buds. That is why if you will see in the recipe to taste. So if you want to have more of it, then you pour. If you want to have less, you pour less. So this is what I normally place when it comes to flavor, to taste, because we have different buds. By the way, for those who have just attended the seminar for the first time, and normally this is what I tell dun sa mga umaten. The flour that you are using in your place will be different from the one that I am using here. For example, I am using in our recipe 250 grams of water. When you go and try now the recipe, you measure the 250 grams but remove the 50 grams. You put first the 200 grams, you mix your dough, don't add it yet, the 50 grams, and see if the dough is firm or not. If it is a little bit firm, you add gradually some water. For example, you added 20 grams, it became a little bit soft, then stop adding because you still have one ingredient that will make your dough softer, which is your shortening butter or margarine. So after this one, you add your fat, butter, margarine, or shortening. You add it first, and then you mix. If you still feel that the dough is a little bit too firm for your touch, now is the time for you to add the remaining water. If, for example, adding another 20 grams, the dough is now soft, so you have 10 grams extra. So the following day, instead of using 250, you only measure 240 grams. On the other hand, let us say you tried it first, you have already poured all the water into the mix, and when you touch the dough, it is still firm, you measure another 50 grams, but don't pour it immediately. You pour it gradually until you notice that the dough consistency is good for your touch. So therefore, what you measured, the 50 grams, you were able to pour only 30 grams and the remaining portion of 20. Therefore, what I could say is this. The one that used more water into the dough has a good flour. I know that the flour that he or she bought is a little bit expensive, but on the other hand, he could add more water into his mix. The other one, whereby the water absorption is even less, most probably he chose a bread brand which has a lower price. So therefore, this is the result. If you buy a bread flour with a lower cost, therefore also you have less water absorption. So now it is up for you to decide whether you will continue using this one or you will go to the other one whereby you could put more water, and if you add more water, what happens to your product? You will have more yield. Okay? Now, the procedure for making our pan de coco is the same like what we have seen sa atin mixing. You mix the dough, you add the fat later, and then later on we'll try to show you how to find out whether the dough is ready or not when you try to stretch it. Now, basically this one will have about 23 pieces out of the given recipe. I'm too sorry that I tried to make an exact number so that this will not be too much for demonstration. But the problem is the capacity of the mixer. It could not mix the dough properly, not unless that the flour weight is 500 grams. If I made it lower, it cannot mix. The dough just clings into the hook. So there is no mixing being done. So therefore, the quantity every time we mix using this machine, it has to be 500 grams. So there will always be excess dough. Like in this one, we will always have excess. Also, I will not be putting all the 23 pieces here because you will get tired. It is just the same method. So now, we have pre-scaled our filling. So you have your coconut here. You have our langka inside. And the reason also why I added our frio here is simply because that this one contains fat. And if you would be mistaken and as you try to press and roll it, the dough might open because of this one. So again, this one should not be cold. It should be at room temperature. So, we press ang ating dough. The dough is 40 grams in weight. Like what we have done a while ago, we press it first. You know how they do it in Taiwan? We are making xiaopao. They do it this way. They hold the dough at the center, then they press the side. So therefore, this one is thicker, this one is thinner for making xiaopao. Just 4 pieces. Yeah.
Sir, someone is asking, hindi po kasi available sa lugar namin ang Frio custard. Ano po ang pwede kong i-substitute?
You buy. Pero, since we have developed it into a different way of making your pan de coco, normally this one is just placed on ordinary pan. But for this time, we're going to use what we call the mamon mold. So, ito yung atin hong gagamitin for our demonstration. Now, you might be asking why in Taiwan they're doing it like this, that the center portion is thick, this one is thinner. It's simply because that when you put the filling, you press it, therefore this one will also become thinner. So when you press it like this, then you get the ends, so you're safe. And we place it here. Okay? You know, sometimes it is good if you travel, even only in the Philippines or nearby countries, you will get some kind of ideas from different people. Now, this is the normal way we are doing it here in our country. We are flattening it out, flat like this. Okay. Now, your question would be, when do we bake the bread? This one will rise, and afterwards will touch the side here. Now, if it touches the side, and it is a little bit higher like this one, you put it inside the oven. So you will have your consistency. Or else, the moment you are able to test this one, and this one is good, we have a plastic cup. Meron ka bang plastic cup? Yung inuman. Yung yun lang, yung puti. Yung malaking ganun yung mataas. Yes. Hindi, mataas. Yung mataas yan. Yung mataas. Let us assume that this is the paper cup, the plastic cup that you use for drinking because you don't have one. So ito yung atin yung sample. Now, what we do is this. You get a certain weight of the dough. For example, 20 grams, 15 grams, or 30 grams. It's up to you. Then you put it there, then you press. When this is about to be baked, you will notice that this one will also rise because you will also be putting this plastic cup inside the same box where you are proofing your pan de coco. So as this one rises, this one will also rise. If you're going to bake this one, for example, after 1 hour and a half, you find out what is the height of your dough here. And then if you are not lonely, so you try to see the height and then you put a mark here, okay? And then the following day, you do the same procedure. You try to bake this one and then also compare it with this one. It is the same height. So what you will do now is, with the use of the guide, you have a guide here, you make a line, okay, and then afterwards you cut it, and then the following day you put on top a marker. Anything, like for example, barbecue stick or what. So you put it there. So you don't have to look anymore on the line whether it is in line or what, and then afterwards with this one. So every time this one touches the bar, you bake this one inside. So therefore, the volume of your bread will always be the same any time of the year. Another thing that I have done also is this. I experimented whereby you try it because mostly in some demonstration, what they normally do is they egg wash the product and then afterwards they bake. What I notice is that the color turns a little bit darker immediately. So what we did is this. You bake first the product. Now since the oven that we are using has steam on it, all we have to do is just press the button and then the steam will come out. In my case, also I'm baking at home and I don't have that kind of oven. What I do is this, especially if your buns contains a sesame seed. If you will not do this after baking, your sesame seed will fly out. So you will only have the mark of the sesame. Prior to baking or during the process of fermentation or proofing, and if you do not have a proof box like what we have, what I do is from time to time, I spray it with water, just mist. So before baking, I also spray it with water and then I put it inside. Now the trick is this. After baking, you will notice that even if you spray it with water, it will not be as glossy as it is. So what we do is this. I remove the egg white from the egg and then add some water like 10 or 20%, put some salt and beat this one. Wally. And beat this one, and then after baking, I brush it on top of the oven. Now, since the problem now is you put there fresh egg and you will have salmonella, that would be your problem, I rebake it, put it back into the oven, give it about 3 to 4 minutes just to kill whatever infestation it might have, and then afterwards remove. And you will notice that the product will be shiny and it would have a good appeal to your product. And more? Okay, so therefore, just for your information, for those of you who would just be starting to bake their product, I'm sorry you could not buy this one in a small quantity, but it would be always in 500 grams. Now, the technique that I do is this. I just slit it with a small hole here, and then I try to measure 5 grams, 10 grams, and then afterwards, with the use of tape, I press it like this to expel the air, and then I put the tape and put it inside the refrigerator. Somebody told me, sir, is it okay if I have a container, put it there, and then place it also in the refrigerator? If your container is very big, for example, the volume of your yeast is only this much, then you put the cover, there is a space here. And the space contains what? It contains oxygen, it contains moisture, so therefore with the presence of oxygen and with the presence of moisture, your yeast will start to activate. And then you will say, why is it that now my fermentation is getting longer than before? Well, it is not my fault, it is your fault. That is why we are telling you the correct way, because as much as possible, we don't want air to be incorporated inside your container. That is why when you receive it, that is why when you buy it, it is as solid as this, because they remove all the air inside. That is why it is called vacuum pack. But the moment you puncture it, then it now becomes soft. So you now have air. So what I normally do, I'm also using the product here. I'm making pizza and buns. What I normally do after I'm through scaling it, I try to remove as much air as I can and then put there the the tape, and then put it inside the chiller as is. And then I could use it. In fact, I was able to, since our production is not that big, even up to 1 month, I can still use the yeast. The only difference is that from 8 grams, I am now using 9 grams. But I can still use it. I get the same proof time of 1 hour and a half for my pizza. Any more problem? Okay. By the way, we had a talk with Mom Jade yesterday afternoon, and we would like to remind ho yung mga nanonood ho lagi sa Sonlie. that on June 30, another Wednesday, it would be a live discussion regarding the theory and discussing purely on yeast and improver. Now, this one would be probably a good one, so that if you have any questions in mind regarding your product, why is it doing like this, then you could ask that question during that period. During lag periods, I'm not baking, so sometimes I am now a member of the plantitos. You know that? you plant. And then I try to watch different yung mga nagbablog. And then if normally, if the one talking is talking too much, I change. That is why we try to cut short yung ating discussion, because if it becomes longer, the one watching does not get any more interested in it. But what caught my attention is this. He showed two types of plants. This one, the leaves are a little bit dry, while the other one is very lush, very green, and very, very good. You know, the difference is the soil that was used. The one that was a little bit, not too much, not very good one, uses only soil, so therefore it is very compact. And the other one, he uses this coconut pit and other things which is loose, so therefore the roots is now getting everywhere, so the plant became bigger. And this has some relation with our yeast. If you are not using the right yeast for your product, this would be your problem. You will have longer fermentation period, you might have a smaller volume, and if the improver that you are using is not also the right one, then the volume that you might be expecting may not be that good, it might not be as fine. So therefore, this is the reason why we will explain to you come 30th of June, the reason why this yeast would be better off than the other one. Okay, not unless that there was another question. If it is like this, it is 2 years. Now, it is not a la chamba that they put there 2 years, because my boss, when I was still working with Besap, Mr. Lalum, he was the guy, in French they call it embusque. Siya yung nag-hire sa akin, direct hire. And according to him, he goes from one country to the other. And one thing I admire in Mr. Lalum is this. He knows how to speak Spanish, German, English. When I left the company, he was studying Chinese language. And I think he knows about 5 or 6 languages, because it is a necessity, because you go from one country to the other. And then normally when they go to countries, they give you the samples. Here, you please try our yeast. Okay, so the owner would tell you, okay, I will use it. But in reality, he is not using it. He just places it on top of his cabinet. Now, it seems to me that after more than a year, Mr. Lalum visited. It was then that Mr. Lalum decided Mr. Lalum decided that from the previous, what we call this one, expiration date, they now changed it to 2 years, because it was almost 2 years when the guy used the yeast. And the funny thing is, the other company just copied suit that it is good for 2 years. Okay, so this is the story of the yeast. And for those of you who are just watching this for the first time, it was Mr. Alonso who introduced the instant cheese for the first time here in the Philippines way back in late 70s and early 80s. Okay? So we will now show you yung products na nagawa ho namin. This is ho yung atin hong ube bread. This is our ube bread. So after baking ho nito, we egg wash it. I only use the egg white, and then rebake it for another 3-4 minutes, just to kill any salmonella if it is present in there. Also this one, you will notice that this one is shiny, this one is not, because intentionally I did not put any egg wash in it. What do you look would be more attractive to your client? This one which is shiny or this one which is dull in appearance? Now this one we use our mold. I also use yung ordinary which is being done outside. Just use the plain baking pan. So this is the appearance of your bread. Also, I egg wash 2 pieces and the other one I did not egg wash it. So if you were the one to buy it, will you pick this one or will you pick the other one? So therefore now it is just a question ng dapat ang inyong produkto would have eye appeal. So this is how you could do it. Now for the yolk, you could use it for your dog. So you don't throw out anything.
Sir, another question. Hello po, Chef. Question po, how important is fermentation period in bread making? Can I skip the fermentation period?
You cannot. One or the other, it will ferment. Fermentation will be the following. If after mixing, you even rest it for 10 or 15 minutes, that is already part of fermentation. So you could not escape it. On the other hand, if after mixing, you cut it and then you put it in your baking pan and you put it in your proof box to proof it, the terminology is just proofing, but still that is part of fermentation. So you cannot escape it. So whether it is resting on the table or whether it is resting on your pan, they are all fermentation. But just to qualify one from the other, after mixing and then you let it rise, they call it first fermentation. But when you try now to put it inside the proof box and then afterwards ferment it, they call it proofing from the word proof box. That is why they call proofing. But it is just a terminology. It is still fermentation. By the way, there are 2 types of fermentation. One is true fermentation. The other one is Baker fermentation. Baker's fermentation is from the time you mix the dough up to the point that you put your dough inside the oven. That is your Baker's fermentation. True fermentation is the moment you add the yeast into your dough up to the point that you kill the yeast while baking. And normally, if it reaches 50 degrees Celsius, this is the thermal dead point of your yeast. So there are 2 fermentation. Baker's fermentation is still rising up to the oven, and then true fermentation from the time you add the yeast up to the time that it is chilled. That means when you see your bread rising up and then afterwards it falls down and does not move anymore, that means the yeast is dead. So that is true fermentation. Okay na? No more questions? So kindly prepare your questions so that on the 30th we will have a good one discussion on that day. So there will be no demo, just discussion. Okay, thank you everyone and see you next time.